is Kathy Walkling. She's the co-founder of EcoFemme. EcoFemme is a global empowerment initiative rising from rural India, reaching out to people around the world. They promote and revitalize menstrual practices that are healthy, dignified, affordable, and eco-positive. It was founded in 2010 and based in Tamil Nadu, India. Their not-to-profit work through Pad for Pad and Pads for Sister takes place with partnerships and organizations based in different states in India. As menstruation is an experience that transcends culture, class, and caste, they work towards bringing a social transformation and ecological awareness through every step of their work. They seek to create a holistic approach to menstruation through integrating ethical business practices, production processes that engage rural women as cloth pad producers, and culturally sensitive, life affirming education about menstrual experience. Kathy personally experienced the shift from disposables to using cloth washable pads in 1999 as a revolution. She was so excited by this discovery that she frantically, in her efforts, tried to encourage other women to make this shift too. This passion was further ignited when she was surrounded by natural beauty of Oroville, which fueled both her awareness of the preciousness and threats to our earth and her heartful wish to preserve it. In 2010, she met Jasmine and together co-founded EcoFemme. She was very committed towards bridging the world with this simple but powerful little product that can transform the planet one woman, one period at a time. Kathy, I am very pleased to welcome you to our session today.
Thank you, Shikara. It's really my pleasure to be here.
That's very nice to know. So before we begin, I would request all the viewers to put their videos off and post all your questions in the chat box. And Kathy, I would like to first start off by asking you, tell us about your journey with EcoFemme, how and when you started it, and what is EcoFemme today?
Sure. So my journey with cloth pads started not long after I moved to India, I moved to India in 1997. And one of the first things that I discovered and was confronted with as a kind of challenge was actually how I would manage dealing with my own sanitary waste. And as I grew up in Australia, and I think this is true in most Western countries, that typically there's a bin or some sort of, convenient disposal option right next to pretty much every toilet, wherever you go, public places, private houses. So up until moving to India, I, just kind of would put my sanitary products in that bin and it was goodbye as far as I was concerned. And reaching India, one of my first discoveries was, well, where do I put this? And I was given a mumpty, and I'm sure many of you know what a mumpty is, and it's maybe a Tamil word, but it's like a digging tool. And I was pointed to the forest and told that I could go and dig a hole in the forest to bury my waste. And I was shocked. And it was difficult. The earth was rock hard. And I think that was one of those aha moments in life where I realized this idea of convenience, disposal and things going away was like rudely shattered. And I was not happy about it. About a year later, when I was visiting my brother in New Zealand, I actually found a cloth pad. And this was sitting in a very small little village store. It was unbranded. It didn't have even a package. It didn't have a name, but I could see clearly what it was. And I instinctively gravitated to that product and I bought it. Sure. Sorry. Thank you. I will be louder. So I bought that product and started using it, and it was amazing to me. What happened, first of all, was I obviously realized that I would just be able to wash and reuse this. So the issue of having to dig holes was solved. But I think what surprised me was my actual experience of actually physically handling the cloth pad. And I'd like to speak a bit about it because this is, to this day, one of the main reasons that a lot of women hesitate to use a cloth pad, because they're disgusted by the idea of washing a bloody cloth pad. And I get it. I think what I saw in that first moment was my own sort of instinctual aversion to, ooh, am I really going to do this? And as I washed the pad, I soaked it in cold water and, you know, just washed it as if it was another piece of clothing. And it was a real kind of contemplation for me. And it made me ask the kind of question of, where did this come from? This idea that there's something really kind of disgusting going on here. And something really shifted. It was sort of, I think, the first time I became aware of how much culture had really, I had absorbed a cultural messaging around menstruation as being disgusting and something to be ashamed of. And from that day on, I sort of really started to enjoy the experience of getting my period and using the cloth pad. And in fact, I also slowly realized other benefits as well, like the money that I was saving by being able to wash and reuse and not have to kind of buy disposable products every month. So that was really how it started for me. It was very personal. And I started to really make the products for women in Oroville initially because I just, knowing this is a very much a community that values sustainability, I figured that I wasn't the only one here that would appreciate a product like this. And of course, people did buy the product and they liked it. But it was not something that I really put effort into making into an enterprise or a social enterprise. I really just did it for love. I did it because I love the earth and I cared about women. Now, I'm going to fast forward 10 years actually, and this is now the start of EcoFemme as it is today. And I'm sorry, I just realised a lot of wind's coming up, so if you're having trouble hearing me, let me know, but I'll try to speak nicely into the mic here. So in 2010, I was working with an NGO that worked with self-help groups and microfinance, and we were looking for income generating opportunities for the rural women that live in the areas around Oroville. And I was, kind of sheepishly one day bought the cloth pad into the office thinking, look, these ladies are learning stitching. This is a really simple product to stitch. And I kind of pretty naively thought maybe we could try to teach them how to make cloth pads and put effort into marketing the product. And initially I was thinking abroad because I knew in the West, just like I found my first cloth pad in New Zealand, there was already quite a growing culture of women switching to reusable products. In India, there was no precedent for this. But I was joined by Yesaman, my co-founder, and we kind of started to get really curious about, what it would be like and what would be the possibilities of doing, trying to see if we could, mainstreaming seems like a really big word. Even 10 years later, I think the product is far from mainstream, but to really offer at least as an alternative to disposable pads. So this was what we set about to do. And that was how EcoFemme began in 2010, with the idea of creating local livelihood opportunities and to try to market and promote the cloth pad concept. And as we sort of started down that journey, we also became very curious about the practices and experiences of women and girls around menstruation. And we started doing research through the NGO and learning, for example, about the cultural attitudes and practices around India, which were quite unfamiliar to me. I learned, of course, a lot about the sort of restrictions that many women faced, the continued practice of ritual seclusion. The fact that many women were told they shouldn't touch plants or go into kitchen, and that this idea of purity connected to menstruation started to become much clearer to us. And the other thing that really kind of heavily impacted us was realizing also that already 10 years ago, there was a lot of women, even rural women, that had started to use disposable napkins. And it was quite recent that this shift had happened. Prior to that, and I'm sure any of you who are listening in will probably know people in your family, maybe you still use cloth, or it's still in our living memory here, I think, that cloth was a prevalent practice until pretty recently. So we began to sort of wonder, well, what's in these disposable pads, And it was actually through research that had come out in the West where they were investigating products which, for example, Whisper, which is branded differently in the West, but it's the same product. We learned that these products are actually about 90% plastic, and it's a very high-tech product, and that these products take approximately 500 to 800 years to break down. So, and there was a whole lot more information I could share more if you want about the chemicals and just what's in a disposable pad. It shocked us. We had no idea that it was such harmful product, actually. And so this is what really motivated us to really put our efforts behind building a much more integral project with EcoFemme that wouldn't just be about marketing and selling and manufacturing cloth pads, but really bringing awareness to what's, the problem of sanitary waste, the issues around health and the chemicals that are in sanitary, commercial sanitary napkins, and to really start to engage conversations that also talked about these linkages between culture, between environment, between gender, between economics. And we could start to see, as we got into it and started having more and more conversations, that menstruation was literally like at the center point of so many converging, what I like to call red threads. And this, of course, made it very interesting, but also very complex. And the big challenge, of course, was that nobody was talking about it because it's a taboo. So this is more or less the kind of genesis of EcoFemme, was sort of realizing that there was a growing problem around sanitary waste. There weren't alternatives that at least were out there that were known. There was an immense work to do to present these alternatives and try to mainstream awareness about these alternatives. And at the same time, we felt it really important to start having conversations that also touched on culture and shame and this inherent kind of aversion to menstruation, as if this is something kind of terrible and disgusting and it has to be concealed at all costs. Maybe I stop there for a moment and see if you have further questions.
Thank you. That was some good insight for us to know how your journey has started with EcoFemme. Like you shared a little bit of personal story. And moving on, what I would like to ask you is if you can tell us or talk a little bit about the dominant cultural view of menstruation and how it is having a negative impact on our lives, both personally and collectively.
Yeah, so this took me a while to understand, this dominant cultural view, because it's almost like it's in the water. And I think that's partly what culture is. It's sort of like a sea that we swim in, and we often don't question it. And I began to question it myself when I washed my first cloth pad and realized that I was kind of uneasy with that experience. And as I was sharing earlier, as we started to have conversations with more and more women and focus groups and just, engaging with whoever would talk to us about it, we started to kind of see a picture. And I think there's a couple of aspects I'd like to speak to around, first of all, the dominant culture. One is this idea that menstruation is very much a private experience that should be concealed at any cost. And the way we know that is that, for example, think about it. I think one of the things that we could imagine would be one of the most humiliating and embarrassing and awful things that could happen to a woman is that she would leak, that she would bleed, and that someone would discover that she has her period. That's a clue, I think, to the kind of, deep instinctive shame that we feel about this experience, that nobody should know that we're menstruating, and there's this aspect of concealment, denial. It's not talked about openly. It's really something that we're taught is somehow also disgusting. And I really see that when, for example, we talk to people about cloth pads and the first thing is, ooh, I have to wash it. Isn't that disgusting? So that's sort of one aspect. I think another aspect, and this is again something that's, I think, very much a global trend, it's very much also in India, is that around about the time we started EcoFemme, that there was a growing movement in India which towards what is called the sort of menstrual hygiene management sector. And there, I think there's some clues in even the language of menstrual hygiene management. And what we notice is the use of the word hygiene, that managing menstruation is is about hygiene. And for me, what was interesting in that wasn't that we were talking about hygiene, it was like all the other things that we're not talking about. You know, as if menstruation is only a hygiene issue. So it led me to sort of feel that, you know, in culture, we're sort of reducing this to something like a sanitary issue, a hygiene issue. And I think there's a much, much richer picture around what menstruation is. And I would like to speak also more maybe later in the call about what I think the gifts of menstruation are. But before we can even talk about the gifts, we think we have to understand the ways in which we're conditioned to turn away and to look at it as something that's that is to be avoided rather than related to in an intimate way, which is pretty interesting considering it's such an innately lived experience for any of us who are menstruating. And then I would say, so I think on the cultural level, that creates a kind of schizophrenia. Like there's this thing that's happening that's so normal and that's so natural, and it is part of our everyday lives, and yet we're pretending as if it's not going on. So that's one consequence that I think, and implications of that. I mean, if you're not supposed to be talking about it, if you're not supposed to be able to name it, if nobody's supposed to know what's going on, what if you're having difficulties? What if you're facing problems? You're having cramps, or you're having, you know, severe pain, or all the many problems that, you know, we all know about that can be associated with menstruation. Imagine a young girl who gets her first period, and the only information she's given is, you know, here, use these pads, and, you know, and stop associating with boys. How is she supposed to get appropriate help if she needs support or if she needs help with that experience? So I think this is a real unfortunate sort of cultural consequence, is that we're kind of left to fend for ourselves. And this can and does have real health consequences. It also has consequences for the earth. I mean, we see as a result of our denial of menstruation, I think there's a very direct connection between our willingness to use products which are, you know, overtly harmful to the earth and really our bodies when you consider the amount of plastic in it. But we're willing to use it. We gladly use these products and, you know, and throw them away, and, you know, and with the consequence of this growing mountain of waste as a result of not being comfortable with this experience. If we were comfortable with it, I think there'd be much more willingness to use reusable products like cloth pads or menstrual cups, which involve also, in a way, getting your hands dirty and handling your menstrual blood. But because we're not comfortable with that, we prefer the products that mean that we just get to use them and toss them and not have to deal with it anymore. So I think there are grave consequences for ourselves, for our health, and for the health of the earth as a result of this culture of silence and concealment. And I think, you know, and this is a deeper one from my feeling, but that if we avoid to look at menstruation and menstrual cycle as something that's really part of our lived experience, I think we are missing some really important feedback and biofeedback about ourselves that maybe I'll say more about that in a moment, but I just want to make sure we're sort of, I'm not overloading you with too much information in one go.
No, absolutely not. You can go ahead and please give us more insight.
Okay. Yeah, I think something I'd really like to unpack, and this was, again, one of the things that was a really slowly revealing insight for me. And it's been so important for my life that I really love to sort of share about it and speak about it wherever I can. And I'm really aware of, you know, the title of this series is called Tuning In. And and that's really why I said yes to doing this talk here today, because I know I'm talking to people who realize that there are, you know, there are many dots to be joined around how we're living our lives and how we're impacting the earth. And I think that there's something around menstruation which I think is, we're sitting on a gold mine actually with this experience, and I'd like to try to unpack that a little bit with you. So I think I first became aware of this when actually we had a visitor coming to meet us in EcoFemme, and she used this term that she talked about the gifts of menstruation, and I found that a sort of intriguing way of talking about menstruation. I suppose to that point I'd still been more or less seeing it as, you know, an experience to be managed, let's just say. I didn't have the same disgust and aversion since I'd shifted to cloth pads. I was kind of starting to make friends with menstruation, but the idea that there were gifts in this experience was really new for me, and I was curious what she meant by that. And anyway, the story that she unpacked and what I'd like to unpack for you today is this idea that, and I think any of us, and this is true for men and women, if you're living in a menstruating body, you this from lived experience. If you live with your daughters or sisters, whatever, we see that there's some way in which women's lived experience is not consistent. You know, we are ebbing and flowing, and just like the moon, which, you know, coincidentally tends to mirror the menstrual cycle, you know, there are phases. It's not that it's full moon all the time, right? And so there was this suggestion that we can start to pay attention to and look at this cycle, not just focusing on the overt phase of bleeding, which is what menstruation is, but the menstrual cycle as a whole. We go through changes, and those changes are happening on an emotional level, a physical level, a mental level. You know, anybody who's had any experience of PMS, and that, you know, and I live that one a lot, will know that there are certain times, and especially if you start to look and start to pay attention and start to track your cycle, you will start to notice that you are not the same person every single day. And so I started to develop a practice, and I really would encourage all of you, if there's one takeaway I'd love to leave you with as a result of this conversation, is to make some experiment with your own experience of menstruation and look at the cycle and start to notice how you're ebbing and flowing with it. And I think one of the things that became really obvious is that there were times when my energy was much higher, and certainly when I was leading up to menstruation and bleeding, you know, these were times of much lower energy and, you know, less productivity. I felt like my mind was not as focused, and I really struggled with that, you know, because I could see that the demands of the life that I was living, and even in EcoFemme, you know, creating this linear 9 to 5, you know, work day, 5 days a week, the expectation was you're on those days, you should show up, be consistent, and, you know, that we're expected to live a kind of present as if we're consistent when actually we're not. And this is presents a real dilemma. And I think the dilemma gets really significant when we actually even zoom out and look at, actually, is that not what we're doing to Earth? You know, we are demanding relentless productivity from Earth. You know, we are not letting her rest. We are expecting her to just deliver. We're extracting with more and more kind of voraciousness. And there's some way where we have so lost our way. You know, we've lost our connection to ourselves as nature, to embodiments of nature, and we are, you know, burning out, and we're burning out our Earth as a result of this inability to hear and listen to the cycles of life. And, you know, anyone who's ever done anything to do with farming will know that, you know, there are seasons for everything. You know, you put the seed in the soil, and there's some time while it's gestating before you start to see sprouts, and then it will go through its, you know, its growth time, and then there's also a time where it reseeds, and, you know, it will you know, flower or fruit, and then it has this kind of phase of degeneration. And this is life. This is life. And yet we pretend as if it's spring all the time. So my suggestion and invitation to you all, and what I could say has been one of the most profoundly transformational things that this work around menstruation has led me to really get really curious about and pay much more attention to, is to honour and value the cyclical being that we are. We are nature. And I firmly believe that the more that we reclaim that we get in touch with that we understand that, and don't think of it as an aberration or as a problem, but think of it as maybe our redemption lies in this, to be able to really say, there's not that there's something wrong when I don't have energy to perform at high performance levels at this particular time of the month, but what if we slow down? And this has become really, really prescient for me. I'm actually in the process of, I'm in perimenopause. My menstrual cycle is no longer consistent. And like all of us, you know, we've just lived this lockdown time. And I think it's been, you know, it's been hard for many people. Let's not whitewash that. But at the same time, I think many of us have started to sense the potential of what it means to stop, to listen in, to notice what quieter, sacred spaces of silence can reveal. And it's really my hope going forward that you know, that we don't keep going forward and try to reset to a new normal as if now the deal is to get back to business as usual and you know, consistent growth as before. Like, can we please, you know, take this moment and take our own bodies as signal and listen to those signals and resource our lives from within. And I think the menstrual cycle can be one of the greatest feedback tools that we have to start to tune into what does it mean to live our lives from within out, listening to ourselves as nature. I know that's a lot to unpack, but I really felt to say it. It's really alive for me at the moment, and I think it's sort of something that, you know, as especially most of us who are menstruating you know, identify as women, we're embodied as women, we know that we have denied the feminine a lot of what we're experiencing can be kind of termed as a consequence of sort of patriarchal dominant culture. I think that the work around menstruation and tuning into it and even using something like a cloth pad or menstrual cup where you just make friends with menstruation is actually a restorative action.
So cat feel I feel it's, you know, sowed a seed in all of our minds to take signals from what our cycles, what the cycles that we usually go through, and I could really connect to that, and I hope others are also can relate to it. We will find out that while, you know, when they when the question. Um, can I ask you another question?
Please.
So now that we've discussed the issues, how can we develop a conscious relationship with menstruation and shift towards living in harmony with nature?
Yeah. I think that, like I've been sharing, I think that menstruation can be a doorway. I think there are many doorways, but I think the first thing is to start listening to our bodies. You know, this is the only true navigation system we've really got. You know, I think we're living in times where there's so much of a difficulty to make sense of information. We're in information overload. We're seeing crises around every corner. Everything's demanding our attention. And I personally really find it a genuine challenge to make sense of this and how can I respond appropriately. So I think the key is to start to develop a conscious turning towards our bodies, learning to listen. That can take all kinds of forms. You know, I think exercise, you know, tuning into nature is absolutely critical. But I think that it's also, you know, again, what I've been saying about menstruation, I'd really urge you to start a practice of tracking your own cycle, because the first step around any change really is noticing. And we're conditioned not to notice. We're conditioned with menstruation to look the other way. So, you know, if we're looking the other way, we're not going to see what's right under our nose and what our lived bodily experience is. And, you know, for example, how to do cycle tracking. There are many ways you can do it. I mean, on a simple level, you can just get an app, and there are many free apps out there you can download on your phone. But I suggested, and even if you do this for 1 or 2 months, just to actually note down every day where you are in your cycle. So day 1 is the first day of bleeding. And, you know, you track it through to the end of your bleeding. It may be 3, 4, 5 days. And then you'll be coming into your pre-ovulatory phase. And then you'll start to notice also around ovulation, there'll be changes in your mucus. So yes, a physical change you can pay attention to. This is if you're not on hormonal birth control or something like this. It's a whole other conversation actually, but you know, just start to notice and then start to track as you get towards premenstruation, and just writing a few words around how do you feel every day. and notice and look at it, how you're feeling, how's your energy, maybe your dreams. This is what I suggest around cycle tracking. But I think the main thing is that we have to start to learn to listen to our body, and nature is a doorway, our inner nature, our inner ebbs and flows, and also just spending as much time as you possibly can in touch with nature, water, animals, plants, whatever way it's possible. I think in cities it's difficult, but find a way to connect. And, I'd love to do reflective writing around, I sometimes take something like a tree and would just sit with it for some time and, and slow my breath down and try to feel into this, the essence of that being, and then just write, words that come to mind. There's so many ways that you can explore this connection. But I think this is the key. When we connect with nature, when we connect with ourselves as nature, then we start to fall in love with it. It becomes a lived experience. It's not abstract. It drops from the mind to the heart to the body. And that's when we feel called to make choices that are more in harmony with nature, not because somebody's telling us to do it, or because we feel guilty, but because love makes us want to do that.
That was very beautifully said, Kathy. I really trying to connect really well to that, and I think you're leaving us with another activity to really learn how to connect, write things down, and think that's really wonderful of you. I would also request you to talk a bit about your products, what EcoFemme is
Sure.
presenting, and how they.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. And I've also seen a few questions popping up on the screen about other alternatives like menstrual cups and biodegradable pads. So I will address those questions as well. I'll start with the cloth pad. I mean, here's one for those that haven't seen. And I'm just going to drop the mic. I hope you can still hear me, but maybe seeing is more important at this stage. Wings. So like a sanitary napkin, there are wings that fasten around the panties. The top layers are made of flannel cotton. So it's absorbent, organic, brushed flannel cotton. And we work with cotton, one, because it's actually just very accessible and available here in Tamil Nadu in India. And it's also, we source all our materials in Tamil Nadu, which is where we're based. So it's really a local product. It also has the absorbency because of the way the cotton has been treated. It's been brushed to open up the fibers and make them sort of softer and able to absorb blood. Then, actually, I'm just pulling out here. I've got a sort of open pad somewhere here too. Just to so inside the pad, you've got many layers of flannel cotton. This is your absorbent core. That's your top layer that's worn against the body. And then the back layer, it's probably hard to see, but it's a laminate. Actually, it's cotton, but it has a lamination of polyurethane laminate, which is a plastic. But what it does is it's a durable material that will last about 75 washes. So it provides leak proofing, and it's clearly one of the things that women want. I mean, they want to be assured, and I want to be assured that, that it's not going to leak. So really, it's taking a traditional practice of cloth and giving it some design elements, your leak proofing your wings and making it more functional. I'll just sort of quickly show you one alternative model too, if I have it. Maybe I don't. Okay, sorry, I was a little ill-prepared with the products here, but there's another version. So we have these in different sizes, and we also have them in a plain, natural, undyed material as well. So it's exactly the same. It's just natural or vibrant, we call it. Different sizes. I'm seeing somebody in a feedback saying that she's a user, very comfortable with them. I think it's also, I could say, that we're actually, I mean, we've been doing this for 10 years and we didn't make this idea up. It's out there. And perhaps also Preeti could even maybe comment later in the call. But, right now we're actually selling this product also in about 27 different countries. So this is a growing thing. This is not some weird idea that, you know, I made up. It's really many, many women, and more women all the time, you know, and to be honest, our growth in India as well has been has been quite significant, because I think one of the things that many women also do face with the disposable pads is problems with rashes and allergic reactions, and I believe that's really because of the chemicals and the plastic in them. So it's a good alternative, but it is a product that you need to get used to. You need to, when you first get your cloth pads, you wash it first like you would any garment, or especially underwear, say, when you're wearing it for the first time. And then I always recommend people to try them initially at home and get used to their absorbency. You can normally wear a cloth pad for about 6 to maximum 8 hours before you would need to change. And then you soak it in cold water. That actually takes most of the blood out. So the washing is actually really easy. A lot of people imagine this drudgery of scrubbing, but it's really not like that. You just soak it in cold water. Then the most of the blood comes out, and then you wash it with a hand, a hand wash, or in a washing machine. Then you can hang it out in the sun to dry. So washing is pretty much like you know, the soaking's a little bit special, but otherwise you can just wash it as if it's your underwear. It's safe as long as you wash and dry and store them in a clean place. There's no risk. Yeah, that's about cloth pads. I'd be happy to take more questions. And perhaps I could also speak to, there was another question about biodegradable napkins. And, you know, it's a tricky one. I think, first of all, you have to really do your homework, because it's like the word organic. I think these words get used a lot, and one has to really understand what does it really mean. And there's also a difference between compostable and biodegradable. And we know that, you know, that biodegradable actually means the pads are breaking down into smaller and smaller particles, but usually there's still, you know, a plastic layer, and because it's use and throw, you still are having to deal with that. Now, again, there might be some more innovations than I'm aware of, but I really suggest you do your homework around that. Okay, I'm seeing lots of questions, so I'll try to get to most of them. I think the other thing one has to bear in mind when it comes to biodegradable or compostable pads is that, you know, it's not just a matter of then putting it in the compost or putting it in your organic waste. You know, it still has to be separated and treated differently. And I think, again, we have the illusion of thinking, oh, it's easy and it's convenient. But to actually deal properly with biodegradable or compostable waste requires a certain effort and consciousness as well. You cannot just put this in the normal garbage. So I think proceed with caution and do your homework. And I think there are more questions which Shakira is tracking, I hope, because I'm not. But I just wanted to speak also to, I saw a question about hygiene and sanitization. And changing in the workplace. Yeah, all excellent questions. Okay, I'll start with that one, changing in the workplace. So again, you know, look, I think, again, common sense. Let's see, I have one here, little bag, a little travel pouch. This is just, so what you can do with this, I mean, you can use any bag. This happens to be our little bag. But what you can do is take your clean pad with you. When you leave your house in the morning, take it in your pouch. And then when it's time to change during the day, you just take out your clean pad. And with your soiled pad, so let's say now this is my blood-soaked pad. I can fold it up like this. So this is the blood, it's all here. And I can fold it once, twice, and I can pin the buttons around into a neat. So I've got now a neat little kind of envelope, and all the blood's inside, you know, and usually they're not, that you can sort of dripping with blood, you know, but so you've got this little thing, and then that's all good to take home, and you can just take it home and wash it when you get home. I mean, you should wash your cloth pad within 24 hours. You can keep them like this for a while, but I'd suggest not longer than 24 hours. Otherwise, you know, really will start to smell. But like this, no problem between the time you change, let's say you change in the middle of the day and you get home from work. So this is something we always show people how to do. You know, just common sense, a little baggie, and take it home and change it when you get home. And I also like to say to people, don't feel you need to also maybe make the change all at once. Some people get this idea it's all or nothing. And And then they're daunted by the idea of, well, what if it doesn't work for me and if I leak? So then they end up not trying it at all. So I suggest you just even start with 1 or 2 cloth pads and get the experience and see what it feels like. And then if it's working for you, once you understand how to wash it and dry it and how much it can absorb and how does it feel and if it's comfortable for you, you may increase your adoption of cloth pads. I know many women who do, half cloth pads, half disposable pads, or they do sometimes menstrual cups and panty liners. So there's no law that says you can't combine products. So I just think that's important to say. Another question about the life of the pads and are they degradable? So the pads can last about 75 washes, which can actually be up to about 5 years. And I suggest for a full cycle, you probably want about 6, 7, 8 pads. But you can reuse them every month, month after month, year after year, until you really feel they've had enough. They're like a garment. And then when it comes to the end of their life, it's cotton. The only thing that's not pure cotton is your back PUL layer, which you can separate. And that should go into landfill, and your metal button. But the rest is just, this is biodegradable. This is cotton, and this will just break down if you bury it. So getting rid of cloth pads is really not a problem. I think I'll need more help with questions now because I saw many and I didn't remember them all.
So I'll help you with that. You can just give me a minute. So there's a question from Parveen which says, since these are not sterilized, is your health not compromised in terms of infection?
No. So again, I think there's a real myth of sterility when it comes to sanitary napkins and sanitary products in general. And I think just, for example, think about underwear. Is your underwear sterile? Of course not. I think the important thing is we have to remember that, like our mouths, like our guts, vaginas actually need a healthy flora of microbiome. And I think it's actually dangerous to associate this idea of sterility with menstruation. We have natural bacteria living in our vaginas, and we do not need to be overly concerned about sterility. We need to maintain hygiene, and that's a different thing. Sterility belongs to clinical settings, it belongs to hospitals, it does not belong to everyday life. So I think the most important thing is just personal hygiene. Wash yourself well, and wash your pad well, dry it thoroughly. We know the sun is nature's sanitizer. Keep them in a clean place so there's no risk of little poochies kind of getting inside your pads, and they're good to go again and again. And it's really pretty much the same care as you would care for your underwear.
All right. So the next question is from Nipunika. It says, is it normal for a cycle to reduce from 5 days to 3? And also, is it normal to experience a lot of premenstrual cramps to no cramps at all?
I am assuming you mean since switching to cloth pads. You can maybe clarify, but I have heard this again and again, that many women have seen a reduction in symptoms and a shorter cycle. So a 3-day cycle is actually within normal limits. I think when you would want to seek help is if your cycle reduces to 1 day. That's really a bit too scanty. But 3, 4, 5 days is okay. Also, if it's more than 7 days, you'd want to seek help. So anything within that range is fine. And as I said, I've heard many women reporting just having a much easier menstrual experience since switching. And I think the reason for this is because you're actually using a more natural product. It's a whole other conversation, but the chemicals that are going into commercially branded sanitary napkins are quite shocking, actually. I don't have all that details. I mean, I'm not a chemist, and I've got resource information, and I'd be happy to share it if you want. I can even share sort of resources with you after this call, Shikaro, if people are interested, or you can reach out to us at EcoFemme. And we also have a blog with a lot of material and information on our website. But the sad reality is that there are all kinds of toxic chemicals going into so-called sanitary napkins, and this has been a big cover-up, and it's really only in recent years that there's been actually even a push to conceal and to reveal the ingredients in these products. I think everyone has a right to know what we're using, and the problem with menstrual products in particular is that they're worn against a highly absorbent and sensitive body part. And the bioaccumulation of these toxins, you think, oh, it's just 1 or 2 days a month, but month after month after month, these chemicals are entering the bloodstream, and they're causing all kinds of endocrine disruption and are linked to cancer. I'm not saying your pad will necessarily cause cancer, but please get yourself informed about this. It's a topic I feel very strongly and passionately about. It's a ticking time bomb, these products. And I think, and listen again to your body. Like, if you're wearing these products and your body's breaking out in rashes and allergic reactions every month, that is a signal, you know, all is not well. And I cannot tell you the number of women, I mean, quite literally, the reason why our growth is so strong is because women are making the switch, and they're seeing that these symptoms are going away, and they're telling their friends. And yeah, so okay, I also seeing there's someone's responding as a doctor about fungal infections from cloth pads. I think the important thing I'd be really checking there is, how are they managing their cloth pad? Are they properly drying it? Because again, these fungal infections, I think, can happen when there's excessive moisture building up. And we have to, I think, sometimes if there's a tendency or proneness to getting fungal infections, I think extra caution needs to be used to dry ourselves after washing and going to toilet, and also really making sure that the cloth is clean, that the cloth is properly washed. When you're rinsing the cloth pad after use, the water is really cleanly running through, and proper sun drying, and then there really shouldn't be a problem as a result of the pad. Again, fungal infections can also come from all kinds of reasons, even diet as well. So that would probably need a bit more unpacking, I would say.
Okay. There is a question on Facebook from Meenakshi. Sorry, it's not a question. She's saying that menstruation should be talked more openly, and she says thank you for doing it. It is a normal body function of half of the human population. And
Yes.
right, there's another question that says, the little buttons are they irritable when the pad is on the body? The question is from Anupama.
Yeah, no, they're very small and they're not perceptible. Yeah, again, I think you have to make the experience, but obviously we wouldn't be, we wouldn't be selling any cloth pads if people were really finding the button was annoying them and it's uncomfortable. It's a small button. It's also a very safe button. Actually, it's the only thing that's not local. We import the buttons. They're nickel and lead free, so they're absolutely inert and safe. I don't know if you can see how really tiny the button is. It's smaller than your fingernail. And yeah, it's really, there's always that little gap anyway between the legs, so you really don't feel the button I've never heard anybody complain about the button being problematic for them.
Can you share a bit? Just a second. Yeah. So, Gayatri wants to know your thoughts about using menstrual cups. Are they safe to use?
Yes, I think menstrual cups are safe to use. This is not really the question. They're made from, I think, mostly from hospital grade silicone. It's inert, and it's the same sort of silicone that's used in, implants in the body. So they're a safe material. I think that the bigger question is usually more about comfort and ease to use them. Obviously, it requires being comfortable to insert and pull out the cup. But I think, again, they're growing in popularity like mad. I mean, there's a huge, I'd say, movement of women who are really sort of switching towards reusables like cloth pads and menstrual cups for all kinds of reasons. And I know so many women who say this has just changed their lives. So I would suggest, if you're contemplating menstrual cup, again, take time, go online, get informed. There's a ton of videos out there that show you how they work. There are so many Facebook groups. I mean, there's just so much out there and it's natural to sort of have questions and maybe anxieties about it, and may even take a little bit of practice to find that right position. But I would just really urge any of you who are sort of, feel like you might be ready to shift away from disposables to yeah, do more research and you know, take a risk and try some of these products out. They're literally game changers, and you know, most people say they never look back.
Right. So there's an interesting question from Neha. It says it's easy to wear your cotton pants and home, but I'm traveling. What's the best solution?
Yeah. Like I said, with work, the same thing, you know, take a travel pouch. And again, I think that was my point really about be practical, use your common sense. You know, this is your body and your life, and it has to work for you. You have to take agency over this. So, you know, if you find, okay, I can do it at home, I can do it in the weekend, but I'm not comfortable when I'm traveling, I'm not comfortable at work. Okay, so be it. But don't let that stop you from at least trying, say, the cloth pads when you can. And then you see and you make your experience. And again, you know, I know many women who continue throughout their lives doing that practice of combination of disposables and cloth pads. I know many who started out doing that and realized they actually preferred the feeling of a cloth pad and ended up figuring out that actually with the travel pouch, it wasn't a big deal. They just get used to that practice at work and or when traveling. So I think it's just part of that personal experimentation with every behavior change. You'll just have to try it out and see.
All right. Nipunika here is asking, what are the challenges you have faced while expanding the business and spreading awareness on this topic, apart from the taboo and inhibitions on washing the pad?
Well, they're the main ones, to be honest. I think, you know, the real obstacles are the mindset, that people feel sort of, you know, hesitant. And it's because of our, you know, I think our conditioning around aversion to menstrual blood and the fear of being, you know, this arduousness of washing. So what I've really learned is that, you know, this is not a fast moving consumer good. You know, this is a product that almost inevitably needs a conversation. And you know, like I'm having this conversation with you today, but you know, one of the things that's really helped EcoFemme a lot is ambassadors, and quite frankly, these are volunteers. You know, women who have made the switch and have gone, wow, this is really cool, and then they tell their friends. This is how our business has grown. You know, we're not like Procter and Gamble or Johnson Johnson that you know can afford to advertise on TV or whatever. This is a word of mouth phenomenon. It's a trust-based peer-to-peer sharing. People trust their friends, and I think this is the thing that you have to be willing to engage this conversation, which may also mean getting over your own inner talk about menstruation, but encouraging men as much as women, you know, be curious. You know, you don't have to know it all. Just start asking questions and finding out, and, you know, asking people in your lives, you know, what products you use, what's it like, are you having issues, have you ever tried, would you consider, you know, and just getting conversations happening is already a big part of culture shift, actually. So I'm a big fan of just talking about it. So they've been the big, it's like one has to spend time on this. This is not finger snapping stuff. I always say cloth pads are not pickles. They don't just sell because you put them on a shop shelf.
All right. I think you're absolutely right when you said it's more of a conversation that you have to find out, spread the word rather than, thinking too much about it and not really figuring out. Here, I would also like to share a small story that I'd like to take advantage of the platform, the position that I have here to have a conversation with you. Friends here, I've been using EcoFrame for about a year, and trust me, it has been life changing. I started out with two pads as a trial. I wanted to test whether this can work or not, and now I've completely shifted towards it. And yes, it is possible. So if I would only tell you that go ahead and buy them and see for yourself whether they work or not. And I'm sure in most cases they will. And going
Thank
ahead,
you.
we're short on time. We're running out of time. Um, so can you quickly tell us where we can get these pads?
Sure. So you can get them in lots of places. If you look on our website, which is ecofemme.org, O-R-G, maybe you can pop it in the chat box. We have an online shop, and we also have a list of retailers. So if you want to actually buy it from a brick store or local online shop, there are many options, but we're also retailing through our online shop. And I just want to add one more small piece too about one of our programs, Pads for Sisters. So actually we also offer a kind of discounted and subsidised pad program for women from low income backgrounds. We largely do that through NGO partners, but because we realise that, of course, not everyone can afford the commercially priced pads. So another point is that all your purchases are actually going towards helping subsidise these pads for low income women. This is because we're a social enterprise, which means that any sort of surplus we made is being ploughed back into our non-profit programs. It's not about us getting rich from this. We're really trying to make cloth pads an affordable and accessible option for everybody.
All right. I would like to ask you one last question. So this question is from Facebook. Anupama is asking. She says that I wear liner daily. Because I don't want to spoil my underwears with white discharge. So are those also not safe for use, both for our bodies as well as the environment?
Yeah, same thing. Sorry, I actually just wanted to show you that we also have panty liners, cloth panty liners. And yeah, your panty liner, if it's disposable, is a small sanitary napkin. I would urge you to try the cloth versions. We have them also without leak proofing, because obviously if you're just using it for white discharge, you really don't even need the leak proofing. So this is 100% cotton. It's breathable. Look, your disposable pads, your disposable panty liners, they're plastic. There's no other way of saying it. They're convenient, I'll grant you that, but they're still plastic. So you are accumulating so much waste from that. And I'm sure on some level, it's also not allowing your whole vaginal area to breathe freely. So my suggestion would be, if you're open to it, to really try the cloth, maybe even without leak proofing panty liners out. Give it a go and see if that makes a difference.
All right. So we're almost done. It's almost 7 p.m. I couldn't. I don't know how this 1 hour went by. I'm so happy, really so happy that you agreed to join us for this series. And on behalf of our Sacred Space team, I would thank you so much for being here today and sharing your views. Breaking some myths and telling us to really tune in and understand how our body works during the cycle. I think that is one big takeaway for me. And it's a great honor to listen to you. There is a message. Our, my colleague is there. So if there's anything that you want to share.
Yeah, no, I really want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. As you can probably tell, I'm more than happy to have these calls. I would have loved to have had more interaction, but thank you for what you're doing as well. I think this is the time, and I think this is the time for the feminine to rise as well. And I think that we're at an incredibly precarious and exciting moment in history. So I really appreciate your initiative with our sacred space and the community that you're building around you, and would be happy to join you for future events as well. Just really thank you for what you're doing too.
Thank you so much for letting us know that. I would thank all the participants here on Zoom as well as on Facebook. Thank you all for joining. Seeing you all, it makes us believe that you are really willing to tune in, to find that connect and reflect back. That is why we have started this series. And I would like to take 1 minute of your time and tell you that next Saturday we have another uh, webinar with Odd Nut Farm, and they are going to talk and actually do demonstrations on natural living products and DIY products like cleaners and other stuff. So we will share that information. If you're interested, please join. That is on 13th June from 6 to 7 p.m. So we've been getting a lot of messages here as well as on Facebook that says thank you, ma'am, and thank you, our sacred space. Thank you for such an informative session. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you so much, Kathy. I hope we will be able to meet someday, once all of this is done, and then we can see how we can, definitely collaborate from other events, and we can end now. Thanks a lot for joining, everyone.
Thank you so much. Okay, good night, everybody, and thanks for giving us your time.
Good night.
Bye for now.
Take care,
Good
everyone.
night.
See you all next week. Bye.